Welcome to Revealed Abundance. Today we're going to be talking about the mastery over sin.
Right. We talked about in a previous episode that we are no longer slaves to sin because we no longer have the sin nature, but we are slaves to righteousness. But we did mention in there that we still sin. So is it possible? Is it actually possible for us to not sin?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to be in Romans 5:12. So go ahead and flip your Bibles there. Therefore, just as through one man's sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world. But sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned. Isn't that interesting? People that didn't sin, it's in the Bible. So, according to the likeness of the transgressions of Adam. So they're saying there's people that didn't sin according to the likeness of Adam. So what is he talking about here? You know, in Genesis, why don't you read what God has to say to Cain?
Right. So Cain had a bit of a sibling rivalry with Abel, and God kind of warned him about it before he did anything. He actually, so in Genesis 4, verse 7, it says, "You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at your door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master."
That's right. So what I love about that is that James kind of talks about that too, you know? And it's this concept that, you know, you yourself or humanity, I'm going to just say humanity, are not evil. It's that sin surrounds us, or it came into the world, kind of like, you can picture like an umbrella, and it's just kind of, you know, hanging over you, and it's like crouching at your door, just like what God tells Cain, you know, sin is crouching at your door, but he also tells him, hey Cain, it's up to you to overcome it. And James says the same thing. James says it's up, you know, when it's conceived, you know, and you've given birth to sin, then you've sinned, but it's up to us to overcome it. And what the great thing that we explained about in our study before is that we're no longer slaves to sin. So what happens is that we're no longer under that umbrella of, you know, this world that wants you to sin, but we're now under an umbrella of righteousness. So that's really just amazing that, you know, I just would really like to point out that, you know, our flesh is not what makes us evil. And our flesh is not what makes us sinners. So that's just kind of been a concept in Christianity. And so we just kind of like to clear that up.
Yeah. What do you have to say about that? Yeah.
Me? Well, I definitely agree with that. I think that us as Christians shouldn't be labeling ourselves under the sinner mentality anymore, because once we do that, we're shackling ourselves to sin, because that's what we label ourselves. So we're like coming into a marriage with sin when we should be coming into a marriage with Christ, because we have Christ's righteousness. It's not about us. It's about Him and what He's done for us.
Right.
So we should not be labeling ourselves under sin. We should be labeling ourselves under Jesus.
Very good.
That's good.
Right. And I know in a previous video we talked about Gnosticism a little bit, and this idea of the flesh being evil, and that we are therefore inherently evil because we are flesh, and giving us that label comes from something called Gnostic dualism. They did believe that the spirit and flesh were completely separate, because the spirit was completely good and the flesh is completely evil. And so you have to, if you want to be completely good, live a sinless life, you have to separate the spirit from the flesh. So basically you have to crucify the flesh. So they did a lot of, I believe they did a lot of like self-mutilation things like that, because that was how they trained the flesh, kept the flesh subdued. And that's ultimately, when in the context before we talked about him, why they had such a problem with Jesus. Because if Jesus came in the flesh as God, he could not be completely perfect, because the flesh is inherently evil.
And
So-
Paul like adamantly like rebukes
Yes.
that in his letters. He
He
says, "Do not believe these teachers, because Jesus did come in the flesh."
Yeah.
So, and that is all birthed from Western philosophy, from the great philosophers like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, all of those. You could go into a big long discussion about that, but
Right.
that is not a biblical concept. Gnosticism
Right.
is not a biblical concept. It is birthed from Western philosophy.
Right, exactly. So I hope that entices you to want to really get into the Word and study, and also study Hebraic biblical culture as well. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe, share, and like, and we'll see you next time.